Megan stood in the dusty living room of her late aunt's crumbling house, wondering why she'd been left with nothing but a pile of bills and a roof that barely kept the rain out. But as her fingers brushed the peeling wallpaper, the walls shifted, revealing a hidden room, one filled with gold and jewels that could change her life forever. Before we dive into this wild journey, leave a comment and tell us where you're watching from. And don't forget to hit subscribe, because tomorrow's story is going to blow your mind. Megan stood at the base of the crumbling staircase, her heart heavy with an odd mix of disbelief and dread. The house in front of her, her late Aunt Clara's house, had been left to her, but it hardly felt like a gift. The peeling paint, sagging gutters, and overgrown weeds that had swallowed the front yard all spoke of years of neglect. It was a mess of broken windows and unkempt, rotting wood, the kind of place that made neighbors shake their heads and gossip in whispers. And yet, here she was, clutching the keys, unsure if she was holding on to a piece of her family's past or a burden she couldn't afford. Megan had never been particularly close to Aunt Clara. There were no warm memories of childhood visits or family gatherings. Clara had been a mystery to her, a distant relative who had lived alone, hidden away in this run-down house at the edge of town. The only thing Megan remembered clearly about her aunt was that Clara had always seemed untouchable, even when she was alive. There had been no phone calls, no birthday cards, and certainly no offers to spend the holidays together. Clara had been a figure on the fringes of her life, distant and faded. Now, Megan was faced with a house that seemed to embody Clara's life, forgotten, hidden, and ultimately left behind. Her mind kept racing through the pile of bills stacked in her kitchen at home, the overdue rent, the stacks of notices with red ink, and the relentless cycle of worry that clung to her like a second skin. She had a child to raise, bills to pay, and a life to build. How could a house like this offer anything but more stress? It seemed pointless. But then again, she wasn't one to turn away from family, no matter how little they'd meant to her. With a sigh, Megan shoved the key into the front door's rusted lock, the metal groaning in protest as the door creaked open. The smell hit her first, musty, stale, as if the house had been holding its breath for years. Dust motes floated lazily in the sunlight streaming through the cracks in the boards, and the air felt thick with the weight of abandonment. She stepped inside, hesitating just beyond the threshold, as if expecting someone to appear from the shadows. Her eyes scanned the room, and a wave of helplessness washed over her. The living room, once probably a place of family gatherings and warmth, was now nothing more than a dumping ground for time's indifference. Old furniture was scattered haphazardly, covered in layers of dust and torn fabric. A faded rug lay in the middle of the floor, its once vibrant colors now a dull shadow of their former self. Every corner seemed to hold forgotten things, photographs, chipped frames, broken lamps, reminders of a life that had been, perhaps, once full of promise, but now left to rot. There was nothing here but the passage of time and the echoes of memories that no one cared to remember. She turned away from the sad scene before her and pulled out her phone. No messages. No one really knew she was here. The estate lawyer had been brief, offering only vague assurances that everything was in order. Megan hadn't even known her aunt was gone until the letter arrived. "Aunt Clara has left you her home," the letter had said. "Please contact us for the next steps." And now here she was, standing in the doorway of a house that felt like a time capsule of a life she knew little about. Her phone buzzed in her hand, pulling her back to reality. She glanced at it, just a reminder about an overdue bill, a new payment deadline. Megan rubbed her temples and pushed the phone back into her pocket, trying to shove the anxiety back where it came from. She couldn't deal with that right now. She had a house to go through, and she had to find something, anything, worth salvaging, something to make this whole thing feel less like a curse and more like a chance. Megan walked through the house methodically, room by room. There was no point in rushing. She was here, and the least she could do was take a few moments to explore. She made her way through the old kitchen, the smell of mildew now overpowering the faint scent of stale food from years past. The cabinets were falling apart, the countertop cracked in places. But something caught her eye, something out of place in all this ruin. A dusty old door half hidden behind a large, crooked cabinet. Her curiosity piqued, Megan moved closer and gingerly reached for the handle. It was an attic door, small and barely noticeable, as though someone had tried to hide it away. She tugged on the handle, and with a sharp creak, the door swung open to reveal a narrow staircase leading up into the darkness. Without a second thought, she grabbed the nearest flashlight from her bag and made her way up, every step protesting under her weight. The attic, when she reached it, was cluttered with old boxes and forgotten furniture, a jumble of discarded memories. But as she moved deeper into the room, her eyes landed on something strange. An old chest tucked behind a pile of furniture. It wasn't the chest itself that made her breath catch in her throat, but the way it seemed to be out of place. Megan walked over, her hands shaking slightly, and carefully pried open the rusted lock. Inside, wrapped in old velvet cloths, were pieces of jewelry, glistening gold rings, diamonds sparkling in the dim light, and other items she couldn't immediately identify. Megan froze, her mind scrambling to comprehend what she was seeing. It wasn't just jewelry. It wasn't just treasure. This was a fortune hidden away for who knows how long, right here in her aunt's house. The weight of the discovery settled heavily in her chest. She had no idea what this meant, or why her aunt had kept it hidden, but one thing was certain: this house, this crumbling relic, held more than just memories of neglect. It held a secret, one that could change her life forever. Megan stood in the middle of the attic, her eyes scanning the chaos that lay before her. The room was a maze of broken furniture, old suitcases, and piles of boxes that looked like they hadn't been touched in decades. A heavy layer of dust covered everything, and the air smelled stale, like it had been sealed off from the world for far too long. The task ahead of her seemed impossible, but she had no choice. She had to go through it all. The house was hers now, and with mounting debts, she was hoping to find something, anything, that might make this inheritance feel like more than a burden. But so far, all she had found were old papers, faded photographs, and a few trinkets that were nothing more than memories of a life long gone. Megan sighed, wiping the sweat from her brow. She had been up here for hours, and it felt like the more she sorted through, the more the house just seemed to swallow her. She reached for another box, the contents barely even worth a glance. It was filled with old newspapers, magazines, and a stack of yellowed books, their pages falling apart from age. She tossed the box aside and turned to look for the next pile to attack, but then something caught her eye. A loose floorboard. It jutted up from the otherwise worn wood as if something had been hidden beneath it. Megan felt a strange pull, an instinctive tug that told her she needed to investigate. Her heart quickened, the quiet hum of the house pressing in around her. She crouched down, fingers brushing against the splintered edge of the floorboard. It took a moment to wedge something under it, but with some effort she managed to pry it open. Beneath the board, hidden away in the shadows, was a small compartment. Dust rose in a cloud as Megan gingerly reached inside, her fingers brushing against something soft and brittle. She pulled out a stack of old papers tied together with a frayed piece of twine. The first thing she noticed was the musty smell, the scent of something that had been hidden away for far too long. The papers were yellowed with age, their edges curling. She carefully untied the twine and began to sift through them. At first, there was nothing too unusual. A few old letters, a couple of faded receipts, and some photographs that seemed to have no real significance. But as she reached the bottom of the stack, her hand brushed against something that felt different. A map. Megan paused, heart suddenly thudding in her chest. It wasn't like the other papers. This one was carefully drawn, with intricate details that looked like they had been sketched by hand, not printed. Her eyes scanned the map, and she could feel her breath catch in her throat. It depicted the house, the very one she was standing in, but there were markings on it that didn't match anything she had seen before. There, just beneath the drawing of the living room, was a large X and an arrow pointing to the basement. Megan's fingers trembled as she traced the lines of the map, her mind racing. What was this? Had her aunt known about something hidden in the house, something important? Megan had assumed the house was just an old relic, something her aunt had clung to in her later years, but this map told a different story. Her heart raced as she looked back at the attic, then toward the narrow staircase leading down. The basement! That was where the map was pointing. Megan stood up quickly, the papers slipping from her hands and falling to the floor. She didn't care. She had to find out what this map meant. She grabbed the flashlight from her bag and hurried toward the staircase, the light casting strange shadows on the walls as she descended. The basement was colder than the rest of the house, and the air felt damp as Megan stepped into the narrow, dimly lit space. The old wooden beams creaked underfoot, and the floor was littered with forgotten tools and boxes. It looked no different from any other basement, until she began to follow the directions on the map. Her heart pounded in her chest as she navigated the basement, eyes flicking between the faded map and the space in front of her. She rounded a corner, and there, in the farthest part of the room, she saw it. A small door, almost invisible against the stone wall. The map had led her here. Megan's breath quickened. This was it. This was what the map had been guiding her toward. She reached out, her hand shaking as she gripped the cold handle. She could hardly believe it, couldn't understand why this hidden part of the house had been kept secret for so long. As the door creaked open, a wave of excitement and dread washed over her. What was behind it? What kind of secrets had her aunt been hiding? And more importantly, was she prepared to face them? Megan didn't know, but something told her that everything was about to change. The house that had once felt like a dead weight now pulsed with the promise of a hidden truth, one she was about to uncover, whether she was ready for it or not. Megan's heart hammered in her chest as she crouched down behind the old wooden shelves, a thin layer of dust coating her fingers. She had been following the map for what felt like hours, her eyes scanning every nook and cranny of the basement, convinced she was missing something. The map had led her here, to this forgotten corner of the house, where nothing seemed to stand out except for a heavy stack of boxes and a long-abandoned furnace. She had nearly given up, thinking the map was a cruel trick, a product of her own desperation. The thought of heading back upstairs, where the attic and all its hidden papers waited for her attention, was tempting. But there was something pulling her forward, a gut feeling that something was just out of reach, something hidden in plain sight. She took a deep breath, pushing the boxes aside with a quiet grunt. And there it was, a door. Not just any door, it was tiny, almost unnoticeable, built into the wall as though it were trying to hide from the very world it belonged to. The frame was narrow, the wood chipped and worn, but the most curious thing was how it blended into the basement's wall. If you weren't looking closely, you would have walked right past it. It was as if the house itself had been trying to keep this secret buried. Megan's breath caught in her throat. She reached out, her fingers trembling, and touched the cold brass handle. It was cool to the touch, almost as though it had been waiting for her. She glanced back at the map one last time, her eyes flicking over the faded lines, the X that marked this spot. The map had led her here. She couldn't stop now. But there was one problem. The door was locked. A flash of memory pulled her back to the attic. She remembered the old key she had found in the dusty compartment under the floorboard. At the time, she'd thought it was just a random trinket, perhaps belonging to one of the old pieces of furniture in the attic. But now, standing before this mysterious door, it made sense. She pulled the key from her pocket and slid it into the lock, the metal cool against her fingers. The key turned with a satisfying click, and Megan's pulse quickened. The door creaked open, and Megan couldn't help but hold her breath. The room beyond was dark, but the air was different, thick with the weight of something ancient. It didn't smell like the rest of the house. Instead of the usual musty, stale scent, there was a faint, almost floral undertone, as if the room had been sealed off from the world for decades and protected from time itself. It was as though nothing had touched this room, no dust, no decay. It felt untouched, preserved. She stepped inside, her flashlight illuminating the space before her. The room was small, but what caught her eye wasn't the size of the space. It was the walls. They were lined with shelves, each one filled with objects she couldn't yet make out in the dim light. But there was something about them that felt important. The room wasn't a typical storage space. It didn't feel like a place where things were meant to be stored and forgotten. It felt like a vault, a sanctuary, a place where secrets had been locked away on purpose. Megan's fingers tightened around the flashlight as she slowly moved deeper into the room, her eyes darting between the shelves, each more intriguing than the last. The room seemed to pulse with an energy she couldn't explain, and her mind raced with possibilities. What was this place? And why had it been hidden from her, from everyone? There was something magnetic about the room, as if it was beckoning her to come closer, urging her to dig deeper. Megan's pulse quickened with excitement. Her eyes fell on a table in the center of the room, covered in what looked like rolled-up scrolls and some sort of intricate wooden box. She hesitated for a moment, then moved towards the table, her footsteps slow and deliberate, as though the room itself might react to her presence. She reached for one of the scrolls, carefully unrolling it with trembling hands. The parchment was old, its edges frayed, and the ink had faded over the years, but the symbols on it were unmistakable. They weren't like anything she had ever seen before, no family heirloom, no ordinary relic. They were symbols that spoke of something much older, something far deeper than a simple inheritance. Megan felt her breath catch in her throat as she realized that what she had stumbled upon was far more than just an old map in a hidden room. It was history. It was a story that had been lost to time, buried beneath layers of dust and neglect. And now she had uncovered it. The room felt more alive now, the air thick with anticipation. Megan's heart raced as she reached for the wooden box on the table, its surface intricately carved with patterns that seemed to shift as she moved. It was as though the box itself was whispering to her, calling out for her to open it. With a deep breath, she lifted the lid. Inside, nestled carefully among velvet lining, were gold coins, jewels, and a collection of objects that shimmered with a light of their own. Her fingers trembled as she touched them, each one more beautiful and strange than the last. This wasn't just a discovery, it was a treasure. And for the first time since her aunt's death, Megan felt a flicker of hope. But even as she marveled at what she had found, a gnawing feeling of unease began to settle deep in her stomach. There was more to this room, more to the house, than she had yet discovered. And whatever lay hidden here wasn't just valuable, it was dangerous. Megan's breath caught in her throat as her eyes scanned the room before her. The shelves lining the walls seemed endless, stretching upward to the low ceiling, each one crammed with boxes, crates, and containers, all of them crammed with secrets. But these weren't ordinary boxes. Some of them gleamed with a soft golden glow, as if the light from her flashlight was bouncing off surfaces that were meant to shine. Others were covered in intricate, ornate designs that looked like something out of an ancient legend. Her heart began to race. She felt like she had stumbled into a forgotten vault, one that had been locked away for centuries. Megan's feet carried her forward, the floorboards creaking under her weight. She reached out a trembling hand and ran her fingers over one of the boxes, its surface smooth and cool to the touch. It felt heavier than it should have, as though it contained something more than just dust and decay. She moved down the line of shelves, her eyes widening as she saw more and more treasures, gold coins, jeweled necklaces, intricate artifacts that could have been from a museum. Each item seemed so out of place in the dark, forgotten room that she almost couldn't believe her eyes. The scent of old wood and metal mixed with the musty air. But it was something else in this room, something older and deeper that she couldn't quite place. It was as if the items had been waiting for someone to uncover them, patiently resting in their hiding places until the right person stumbled upon them. Megan's fingers trembled as she picked up a small, ornate box from one of the shelves. Its surface was inlaid with gold, the patterns delicate and beautifully crafted. She opened it carefully, her breath catching as she found it filled with gemstones, rubies, sapphires, diamonds, all of them sparkling in the dim light as if they had just been placed there. She closed the box slowly, her mind reeling. These weren't just ordinary valuables. They weren't things that belonged in an attic or a basement, hidden away for no one to find. No, these were items that belonged to a different time, to a different world. They were treasures, the kind of things people would go to great lengths to possess. And yet, here they were, stacked and forgotten, untouched for who knows how long. Megan's pulse quickened as she moved down the shelves, her hands moving from box to box, each one more beautiful than the last. But there was something weighing on her chest, a gnawing feeling that kept her from truly understanding what she was seeing. How could this be real? Could this really be her aunt's house? The woman who had lived here in such squalor, a woman who had never seemed to care much about wealth or possessions? No, it didn't make sense. It couldn't. She picked up a gold coin from one of the shelves, turning it over in her fingers. It was larger than any coin she had ever seen, its surface etched with symbols she didn't recognize. There was no way this was a simple family heirloom. This was something far more valuable, far more ancient than anything she had imagined. Megan's mind raced with questions. Had her aunt known about this? Had she kept it hidden all these years? If so, why? She wanted to believe it was real, wanted to believe that this was her inheritance, that her aunt had left this treasure for her. But her reality was one of overdue bills, a small apartment, and a daughter who needed more than just a roof over her head. The weight of her struggles pressed down on her, making it hard to accept the beauty of the room before her. How could something so extraordinary be part of her life, when everything else seemed so ordinary, so broken? Megan moved back to the center of the room, her eyes taking in the gold and jewels around her, the priceless artifacts that lay at her feet. They were so beautiful, so perfect in their untouched state, that it felt like she was walking through a dream. She couldn't help but wonder what had happened to the people who had hidden all of this away. Who had owned these treasures? Why had they been locked in this room, out of sight and out of reach, for so many years? And more importantly, why had it all been left to her? Her hands shook as she picked up a large chest, its surface covered in intricate carvings of mythical creatures and scenes that seemed to tell a story. She set it down on the floor in front of her, fingers tracing the designs. The chest felt heavy with history, as though every piece of it held a story, a memory that had been buried for far too long. She hesitated for a moment, then slowly opened it, her breath catching as the lid creaked open. Inside, resting on a bed of velvet, was something even more astonishing than the coins and jewels, an old leather-bound book. The pages were yellowed with age, and the spine was cracked from years of wear. Megan's eyes widened as she carefully pulled it from the chest, her fingers brushing against the ancient leather cover. This wasn't just a book. It was a record, a journal, a key to understanding everything she had just uncovered. Megan could feel her heart pounding in her chest, the weight of the discovery settling into her bones. This was it. The thing she had been searching for, even if she hadn't known it until now. This book was the answer to the question she had yet to ask. And in that moment, Megan realized that her life, the one she had thought was defined by struggle, was about to change. Everything was about to change. Megan sat in the dim light of the hidden room, her hands trembling as she sifted through the treasures that surrounded her. The air in the room was still, almost too still, as if the house itself had exhaled a sigh after being shut away for so long. The velvet-covered chest lay open at her feet, its contents more extraordinary than she had ever imagined. Gold coins, jeweled necklaces, and old artifacts, things that could change everything, things that could make her rich beyond her wildest dreams. But there was something more, something that drew her deeper into the mystery. Her fingers brushed over the other items on the shelves, and she couldn't help but notice how well preserved everything seemed. Despite the dust, despite the age, the objects looked as if they had been waiting for someone to come and see them, to understand their significance. They didn't look like they belonged in an attic or a forgotten corner of a house. They belonged somewhere else, somewhere far grander than this decaying home. Megan's eyes kept returning to the chest, and it was there that her attention finally landed on something that sent a chill down her spine. A journal, its cover worn and creased with age, tucked carefully beneath a pile of old papers. It was a small, leather-bound book, and the moment she touched it, she felt as though she was holding a key. One that would unlock answers to questions she hadn't even known to ask. She opened it slowly, each crack of the spine louder than the last, and began to read. At first the words seemed innocuous, short entries dated and seemingly inconsequential, but as Megan read on, she began to realize that the journal wasn't written by her aunt. It was written by her aunt's late husband, a man she had never known, a figure who had never appeared in any of the stories her aunt had shared. His name was Charles, and the entries in the journal were filled with strange, cryptic notes, hints of a life that had been shrouded in secrecy. One entry stood out, written in hurried, almost frantic handwriting. "The house holds more than we ever imagined. The treasure is hidden within these walls, but so is the darkness that it has brought us. Beware, Clara, beware of the past that never stays buried." Megan's breath caught in her throat. The treasure, the map, the hidden room. Could this journal be referring to everything she had just discovered? As she turned the pages, the story began to unfold in ways she hadn't expected. Charles, it seemed, had been deeply involved in something much larger than mere family inheritance. He had made deals with people who were equally hidden, equally secretive. There were mentions of late-night meetings, strange visitors to the house, and a family legacy tied to things far darker than jewelry or coins. The journal revealed that Clara had never been just a simple woman. She had been part of a much larger, tangled web of secrets, betrayals, and riches that were as much a curse as they were a blessing. One entry struck her particularly hard. "I made the mistake of trusting him. He promised safety, but he lied. And now the treasure we sought has become a burden, one that no amount of gold can ever lift. I fear what will happen when Clara learns the truth." Megan's heart pounded in her chest. What truth? What had her aunt known? Why hadn't she ever spoken about Charles's past? As the journal continued, Megan's mind raced with the implications of what she was reading. It was clear that Clara had known more than she had ever let on. She had kept the family's secrets locked away, hidden from everyone, even Megan, who had never known about the treasures or the dark dealings that had accompanied them. But what had really happened here, and why had Clara hidden it all away? Megan paused, her hand hovering over the next page, her thoughts swirling. She had stumbled upon something far bigger than she had ever imagined. This was no ordinary inheritance. This was a legacy filled with shadows and whispers, a story of wealth and betrayal that had shaped her family's history in ways she couldn't yet comprehend. The journal was beginning to feel like a warning, one that had been left for her to find, to piece together. The secrets were all here, locked in the pages, and they were waiting for her to unlock them. But with each page she turned, Megan couldn't help but wonder, what kind of person would leave such a legacy behind? And more importantly, what kind of person was she becoming by digging into it? Her thoughts were interrupted by a sudden sharp noise from the hallway. She froze, the journal slipping from her hands, her heart hammering in her chest. The house had never felt so alive with danger before, and in that moment, Megan realized she wasn't just uncovering family secrets. She was uncovering a past that had never wanted to be found, and she wasn't sure if she was ready for what came next. Megan sat in the hidden room, surrounded by treasures that seemed too magnificent to belong to the life she had known, The coins, the jewels, the artifacts, they were unlike anything she had ever imagined. For a moment she allowed herself to revel in the shock of discovery, the kind of revelation that feels both thrilling and dangerous. The sheer weight of what lay before her was overwhelming, and yet there was a part of her that couldn't quite believe it. Could this really be hers to claim? She picked up a glittering diamond necklace from one of the shelves, its diamonds sparkling in the low light, the intricate design catching her breath. It felt heavier than it looked, and not just because of the solid gold chain or the weight of the stones. It felt heavy with the weight of responsibility. This was more than just an heirloom. It was a symbol, a key to a door she had barely begun to open. Megan's thoughts raced. She had lived a life of struggle, working long hours, scraping together just enough to keep her and her daughter afloat. And now here she was, with a room full of treasures at her feet. The thought of how these riches could change her life, how they could erase the crushing weight of debt and offer her a future free from worry, was intoxicating. She could sell them, start over, make a life for herself and Lena that didn't feel like it was constantly teetering on the edge of disaster. But then the other side of the equation settled in her mind, slowly but surely. These treasures didn't belong to her, not really. They were her aunt's, or more precisely, her aunt and uncle's. Megan had never known much about her Aunt Clara's past. Clara had been the quiet, humble woman who had always lived modestly, never talking about her family's wealth or past. She had kept her life hidden, and this house, this room, was evidence of a history that had never been shared with Megan. It made no sense that Clara, a woman who had lived in relative poverty, would have kept something like this secret. Megan's fingers tightened around the necklace, her mind pulling her in different directions. She had found this treasure, hidden away, tucked deep inside the house, and now she was the one who had uncovered it. But was it really meant for her? Had Clara intended for her to find it, or was this some mistake, a secret meant for someone else? Her stomach tightened with the thought. What if Clara had planned to pass it on to someone else, someone she had loved more than Megan, someone who truly deserved it? Her heart ached as she thought about the family she never knew, the one Clara had shielded from her. She had always assumed her aunt's life had been simple, maybe even lonely. But this discovery was telling her something different, something that didn't fit the picture she had painted of her aunt. Clara had kept this hidden, not out of poverty, but out of some deeper, darker reason. The room she had uncovered wasn't just a place for wealth, it was a vault of secrets. Megan's thoughts circled back to her own life. She had always felt like an outsider in her family, as though she had never truly been part of the world Clara had belonged to. She had never been close to her aunt, never felt a deep connection to her. But this treasure, this was something more than just an inheritance. It felt like a gift, but it also felt like a curse. The burden of knowing what to do with it pressed heavily on her shoulders. If she kept it, it would change everything. If she didn't, she might lose everything. The decision felt too big, too heavy for her to make alone. Megan held the necklace in her hands, staring at it as if it could answer her questions, as if it could make the decision for her. The weight of the diamond seemed to pull her in two directions. One path led to freedom, freedom from bills, from stress, from the constant worry about the future. The other path led to a more dangerous place, where secrets, guilt, and responsibility would follow her for the rest of her life. She knew what the right thing to do was, or at least she thought she did. She had always believed in honesty, in doing what was fair, in not hiding from the truth. But how could she give this up? How could she walk away from something that could change everything for her and her daughter? The temptation to keep the treasure for herself was strong, too strong. But the nagging feeling that this wasn't meant for her, that it was somehow tied to a past she had never known, was even stronger. Megan sighed and placed the necklace down gently on the table. She stood up, pacing the small room, her fingers brushing against the other treasures that lay within it. She could hear her own thoughts echoing in her mind, each one louder than the last. She didn't know what to do, and in that moment she realized she might never know. The weight of the past, of her aunt's secrets, was now hers to carry. But was it a weight she was willing to bear? Megan sat in the dim light of the hidden room, the gold coins and jewels glinting softly around her like a surreal dream. The weight of her discovery pressed down on her chest, a mixture of excitement and dread she couldn't shake. She had never felt so conflicted in her life. These treasures, they were more than just wealth. They were secrets, buried beneath layers of time, now suddenly thrust into her hands, demanding answers she wasn't ready to face. Her mind raced, each thought crashing into the next. What should she do? Who could she trust? She needed someone to talk to, someone who could help her make sense of all this. Megan pulled out her phone, her fingers hesitating over the screen for a moment before she finally pressed Liza's name. Liza had been her best friend since college, the one person who knew everything about her, her struggles, her fears, and her dreams. If anyone could help her through this, it was Liza. The phone rang, the sound echoing in the quiet room, and Megan felt her stomach twist with nerves. Liza answered on the third ring, her voice sleepy but warm. "Megs? What's going on?" "It's late." Megan's breath caught. Her words momentarily stuck in her throat. How could she explain this? How could she tell Liza what she had found without sounding completely insane? She closed her eyes for a moment, trying to steady herself. "Liza, I need to talk to you. Something's happened. Something big." Liza's tone shifted immediately, concern creeping into her voice. "What's wrong?" "You sound weird." Megan glanced around the room, as though the walls could somehow close in on her. "I found something in my aunt's house." "Something I wasn't supposed to find." She let the words hang in the air for a moment, then rushed on. "Liza, there's a hidden room in the basement. A room full of treasure, gold, jewels, coins. It's like a museum's worth of stuff, all buried away." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Megan could practically hear Liza's brain working, trying to process what she'd just said. Then, finally, Liza spoke, her voice trembling with a mix of disbelief and awe. Wait. What? Are you serious? You found what exactly? Gold? Jewelry?" Megan's fingers gripped the edge of the table as she explained, her words tumbling over each other. "Yes, it's all there. Piles of it. But I don't know what to do with it, Liza. I don't even know if it's meant for me. My aunt, she was always so humble, so modest. Why would she have kept this hidden away?" Liza's voice was firm now, practical. "Megan, this is insane. You need to get it appraised, like immediately. You don't know what you have on your hands. This could be worth millions. You have to make sure it's legitimate, and then you need to figure out how to handle it. You can't just leave it there." Megan let out a breath, but it was shaky, unsure. The thought of bringing in an appraiser, of letting someone else into the house, into her discovery, made her skin crawl. She felt like it would shatter the fragile world she'd just uncovered, turning everything into something too real, too dangerous. "I don't want anyone to know, Liza." "Not yet." "What if I do get it appraised, and then someone comes for it? What if someone tries to take it away from me? I don't even know if my aunt meant for me to have it." "Megan," Liza interrupted, her voice soft but insistent. "You're not just going to hide it, are you? This is a once-in-a-lifetime discovery. You're a single mom. This could change everything for you. You could pay off your debts, put that money aside for Lena's future, have a life that's not constantly hanging by a thread. You have to at least find out what you're dealing with." Megan closed her eyes, feeling the weight of the decision press in on her. She thought of Lena, of the life she wanted to give her daughter, of the future she could never seem to catch hold of. This could be the escape she had been waiting for, the chance to finally live without fear of the next bill or the next crisis. But the fear was there, lurking in the background. The fear of what would happen if she wasn't careful. What if all this came at a price she couldn't pay? "I know," Megan whispered, the weight of it all threatening to crush her. but I can't help but feel like it's not mine to take. Like there's something I'm missing, something I'm not seeing. My aunt, she never talked about any of this. She never mentioned anything about family riches. It's like she was hiding it all for a reason. What if I'm making a huge mistake? Liza was quiet for a moment, and when she spoke again, her voice was softer, more thoughtful. I get it, Megan. I do. But you have to look at this as an opportunity, not a mistake. If your aunt really left you this, it's not a curse. It's a chance. Don't let fear stop you from making your life better, especially when your daughter's future is on the line. Megan swallowed hard, the tears she hadn't let herself shed welling up in her eyes. What if I can't handle it? What if it all just ruins me? Liza's voice was steady, full of conviction. You're stronger than you think, Meg. You've always been. You can handle this. And I'll be here to help you through it, okay? Megan nodded, even though she knew Liza couldn't see her. The weight of the decision still hung in the air between them, but somehow, with Liza's words echoing in her mind, she felt a little less alone, a little less afraid of what was to come. I'll think about it, Megan whispered. But you're right. I can't hide from this. I don't know what to do next. You don't have to know everything, Liza said gently. Just take one step at a time. As Megan hung up the phone, she felt a strange calm wash over her. The future was still uncertain, still filled with questions, but for the first time since she'd opened that hidden door, Megan felt like she wasn't standing on the edge of a cliff. Maybe, just maybe, she was standing at the beginning of something new, something bigger than she could have ever imagined. Megan's fingers moved restlessly over the treasures before her, tracing the contours of a gold coin, then a finely crafted bracelet, her mind still spinning from the discovery. The glint of the jewels and the weight of the gold seemed almost surreal in her hands. She had never seen anything like this in her life. Things that could change everything, yet came with an unspoken burden. But as she began to carefully organize them, her thoughts went back to the journal, to the cryptic entries that hinted at secrets deeper than the treasures themselves. What had her aunt known? What had she kept hidden? Her hand stilled as she thought of what Liza had said. Don't let fear stop you from making your life better. But what if it wasn't that simple? What if taking the treasure was a mistake? Her reflection was broken by a sharp knock at the door. The sound reverberated through the empty house, too loud, too sudden. Megan's heart skipped a beat. Who could it be? The house was far off the beaten path, the kind of place where visitors were rare and strangers even rarer. She hesitated for a moment, wiping her hands on her jeans, wondering if she had imagined it. Then another knock came, louder this time, more insistent. With a sigh, she stood up and made her way to the door, her footsteps echoing in the silence. As she opened it, she was greeted by a man in his late 40s, sharply dressed in a dark suit that seemed out of place against the peeling walls of the house. His shoes were polished, his tie perfectly knotted. He held a letter in one hand, and his gaze was sharp, his posture commanding. "Good afternoon, Ms. Hollis," he said, his voice smooth, professional. "I'm Thomas Reeve. I represent the distant relatives of your late aunt, Clara." He handed her the envelope with a formal nod. "This letter is for you, regarding the estate." Megan's stomach tightened. The name Clara echoed in her mind, but nothing about this man felt familiar. Her aunt had never spoken of relatives. In all the years she had known Clara, there had been no mention of family beyond the vague, distant whispers that came with old age. No cousins, no siblings, just the quiet life Clara had lived in her run-down house. Megan's suspicion flared instantly. Who were these relatives, and why hadn't they shown up before? The house was hers now, but this man's sudden appearance made her uneasy. "Relatives?" she repeated, her voice steady, though her mind was racing. "I never knew my aunt had any family. I've already taken care of the estate." She glanced at the letter in his hand, then back at his cool, calculated eyes. Something about his demeanor set her on edge, a quiet but persistent discomfort that made her pulse quicken. He nodded as though he'd anticipated her response. Yes, well, it seems there were some matters your aunt left unresolved. Her family is concerned about the inheritance and the disposition of her assets. I've been sent to ensure everything is in order, particularly regarding the house. Megan's heart skipped a beat, and she felt an unease coil in her stomach. The house is fine, she replied, trying to keep her voice even. Everything's been taken care of. I don't need any help. His eyes flickered to the doorframe as if assessing the house, then back to her, his expression unwavering. I understand your position, Ms. Hollis, but it's important that I inspect the property. I need to ensure the estate is properly accounted for, and if there are any hidden assets, There's nothing hidden, Megan interrupted, her voice more firm now. She crossed her arms, unwilling to let this stranger enter the house, unwilling to let him see the treasures she had just uncovered. I've already spoken with the attorney handling the estate. Everything has been sorted. The lawyer didn't seem put off. Instead, he offered a polite smile that didn't reach his eyes. Of course, Ms. Hollis, but for legal purposes, I must request to see the house. If you would just allow me a moment. Megan's instincts flared. She stepped back from the door, subtly blocking his entrance, her gaze narrowing. I'm not letting you in, she said, her voice more forceful now. I don't know who you are, but you're not going through this house. My aunt never mentioned any family, and I'm not about to let some stranger barge in here with a letter you probably wrote yourself. The man's smile faltered for a brief second, but he quickly recovered. He didn't push further, but Megan could see the faintest tension in his posture. His hand hovered near the doorknob for a moment, then he straightened, glancing at the envelope still in her hand. I understand your hesitation, Miss Hollis, but please remember, the law is clear about inheritance rights, and I'm only here to protect your interests. The relatives will not be satisfied without an inspection. If you truly want to avoid any issues, I strongly advise you let me do my job. Megan stood her ground, the letter heavy in her hand. This man didn't seem like someone who cared about protecting her. He seemed more interested in finding something she wasn't ready to give up. The unease she had felt from the moment he'd arrived hadn't dissipated. In fact, it had only grown stronger. I'm not letting you in, she repeated, more resolute now. I'll deal with this with the lawyer, but you need to leave. The lawyer studied her for a moment longer, as if weighing his options, before giving a short, polite nod. Very well. But remember, Ms. Hollis, the relatives will be expecting an answer. If you change your mind, I'll be in touch. With that, he turned and walked down the steps, the echo of his footsteps fading into the quiet. Megan stood at the door, her heart still pounding, her mind racing. Who were these relatives, and why had they waited so long to make their presence known? The discovery of the treasure had already thrown her life into turmoil, but now, with this strange lawyer showing up out of nowhere, the weight of her aunt's secrets seemed heavier than ever. As Megan closed the door, she couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. Something was coming, something she wasn't prepared for, and it was only a matter of time before the house's hidden past began to catch up with her. Megan stood at the door, watching the lawyer's figure disappear down the gravel path, but even after he was out of sight, the tension in her chest didn't ease. Her heart was still pounding, her mind whirling with the weight of the encounter. She had stood firm, but something about the way he spoke, the way he carried himself, made her uneasy. This wasn't just a man doing his job. There was something more beneath the surface, something he wasn't saying. She closed the door with a quiet click, the silence inside the house pressing in around her. Her hands shook slightly as she leaned against the door, her mind racing back to the treasures hidden in the basement. The gold coins, the jewels, the velvet-covered chest with its secrets locked away. She could still feel the weight of them in her hands. They were worth more than she had ever known, more than she ever imagined she could have. But now the lawyer's words echoed in her mind, his insistence that he needed to inspect the property like a shadow she couldn't shake. She had already decided she wasn't letting him in, but she couldn't stop the uneasy feeling that had settled in her stomach. This wasn't just about the house or the estate. It was about what she had found, what he suspected she had found. Megan turned from the door and walked into the living room, her feet heavy on the floorboards. She glanced around the empty space, the place that had once felt like a burden, a never-ending list of repairs and bills. Now it felt different, almost like a cage. The weight of the house's past pressed against her, the silence thick with hidden truths. Her eyes moved to the hallway leading down to the basement, the dark passageway that had concealed the hidden room. She thought of the treasure, the things she had uncovered in that secret space, and the sensation that gnawed at her, a sense that everything was about to slip from her grasp. Her hand instinctively reached up to touch her neck, where the glittering diamond necklace from the chest rested against her skin. It felt out of place, like it didn't belong in her world, like it was part of a life that wasn't hers to live. What had she gotten herself into? She closed her eyes for a moment, her breath coming a little faster. The lawyer had made it clear that he wouldn't back down, that he would come again, and next time he might bring someone else with him. She knew what that meant. He wasn't going to let this go. The relatives he mentioned, whoever they were, hadn't been heard of before. Why were they suddenly interested in her aunt's estate? Why hadn't they shown up when Clara was still alive? Megan thought of the journal, of the cryptic entries that painted a picture of family ties and buried secrets. She didn't know much about her aunt's past, and now it seemed like she might never fully understand it. Clara had kept so much hidden, and now Megan was carrying the weight of it. It wasn't just the treasure, it was everything it represented, the lies, the deceptions, the betrayal. The more Megan uncovered, the more she realized that her aunt had been trying to protect something. But from who? From what? She couldn't shake the feeling that everything she had just uncovered was in danger. What if the lawyer knew more than he was letting on? What if the treasure wasn't meant for her, but for someone else? What if she was just a pawn in a game she didn't understand? The thought of losing it all, the money, the future she had hoped for, tightened her chest. She had been so close to something better, something real, but now it felt as though it was slipping away, just out of reach. Her thoughts kept swirling, and she found herself pacing the room. She hadn't felt this cornered in years. The house, once an overwhelming burden, now felt like a trap, its secrets closing in around her. Megan's gut told her to trust no one, to keep everything hidden, to never let anyone know what she had discovered. But the lawyer's words, his insistence that he would come back, made her feel as though the walls were closing in. Megan stopped pacing, suddenly still. She stared at the floor for a moment, the weight of the decision pressing down on her. She had to act. She couldn't let the lawyer take control of this. She couldn't let anyone find out what she had found, not yet. Not until she figured out what to do next. Her gaze flicked to the basement door, the way it stood silently at the end of the hallway, as though it too were waiting for her to make a choice. The secret room, the treasures hidden inside. Everything she had wanted, everything she had dreamed of, was just below her feet, but now it felt more like a curse than a blessing. Megan's breath steadied as she reached for her phone. She needed answers, and she needed them fast. But more than that, she needed to make sure no one would take what was rightfully hers. The lawyer might be back, but she wouldn't let him take what was hers without a fight. The decision had been made. Now, all that was left was to see it through, no matter the cost. Megan barely slept the night before. She had tossed and turned, her mind replaying the conversation with the lawyer over and over, the weight of his words pressing down on her. Something about him, his calm insistence, gnawed at her. She had spent hours going over every detail of what she'd found in the hidden room, wondering if she'd missed something crucial, something that might tip the scales in someone else's favor. But no matter how many times she ran through it all, the answer stayed the same. The treasures were hers. She had uncovered them. They had been hidden away for years, locked up by a woman who had kept secrets from the world and from her own family. But then the knock came. It was early morning, too early for anyone to be dropping by, and Megan's heart dropped into her stomach before she even reached the door. She already knew who it was, the way the hairs on the back of her neck stood up, the tightening in her chest. It was all the same. The lawyer was back. She opened the door slowly, trying to steady her nerves, and there he stood again, Thomas Reeve, dressed in that same sharp suit, his expression more serious than it had been the day before. In his hand was another envelope, this one thicker than the last. "Good morning, Miss Hollis," he said, his voice smooth but colder this time. "I'm sorry to bother you so early, but I have something more urgent to discuss." Megan tried to keep her voice steady. "I thought we agreed there was nothing more to discuss." Reeve's eyes flicked past her into the house as though sizing up her every move. "You misunderstand. The matter of the inheritance is far from settled, and frankly, Ms. Hollis, it's become clear that there's some miscommunication here about who this property was truly meant for." Megan's stomach twisted. "What are you talking about?" He stepped forward, his demeanor now more forceful, his words like a tightening noose. "According to the records and my client's knowledge of your aunt's estate, the inheritance was never intended for you. You're not the rightful heir. My clients are, in fact, the direct descendants of Clara's family line, and it's become evident that she left the estate under false pretenses." Megan's breath caught in her throat. The air seemed to thicken, her heart racing in her chest as the words hit her like a punch. She had never heard of these distant relatives before, and now they were here, laying claim to everything she had found. She had always assumed her aunt had no living family, no one left who cared about the house. But now this man was standing in front of her, making it clear that she was no longer in control of what she had uncovered. I don't understand," Megan stammered. Everything's been settled. The house is mine now. My aunt left it to me. There's no way she left it to anyone else." Reeve's eyes darkened, the smile gone. "Unfortunately, that's not the case, Miss Hollis. The will has been contested, and if you do not vacate the property immediately, I will have no choice but to take legal action." Megan felt the room spin around her. Her aunt's will. She had never thought there would be a contest. It hadn't even occurred to her that Clara might have left something behind that would spark a battle. But now, with this man standing in front of her, demanding control, she realized just how unprepared she was for the war she had unknowingly stepped into. The pressure mounted in her chest, suffocating her. She thought of the treasures hidden in the basement, of the gold and jewels that could change everything for her and Lena. She thought of the velvet-covered chest, the gold coins glistening like a dream. She had wanted to believe that it was hers to keep, to change her life, but now it felt like a dangerous game, one she didn't know how to win. "I don't have time for games," Reeve continued, his voice cutting through her thoughts. "I'll give you one final opportunity to hand over the keys to the house and settle this matter amicably. If you refuse, I'll be forced to involve the authorities, and I'm afraid you'll lose far more than just this property. My clients want what is rightfully theirs." The words were final, cold, and unyielding. Megan's mind raced, her thoughts tangling with each other. She couldn't back down now, not after everything she had uncovered, not after everything she had hoped for. But how could she fight someone with so much legal power, with family connections she had never known about? The discovery she had made in that hidden room now felt like a weight she couldn't bear, a treasure that came with a price she hadn't been prepared to pay. "I'm not giving up the house," Megan said, her voice shaky but firm. She stepped back from the door, her resolve hardening even as the anxiety threatened to overtake her. "You can't just take it from me. I won't let you." Reeve stood still for a moment, studying her with an unreadable expression. Then, with a curt nod, he turned and walked away without another word, the sound of his footsteps fading into the distance. Megan closed the door with shaking hands, her breath coming in short, shallow bursts. Her heart was still pounding, the tension still hanging in the air. She had made her decision, but now the real battle was about to begin. The gold she had found was no longer a blessing. It was the center of a storm she wasn't ready to face. And as she turned back toward the basement, her stomach churned with the overwhelming realization that she was in far deeper than she had ever imagined. Megan sat in the dim light of the basement, the journal spread out before her, pages rustling softly as she flipped through them. The weight of the discoveries she had already made felt heavy in her hands, but something told her she hadn't uncovered everything. There was more that would explain why Clara, a woman she had always thought of as quiet and humble, had kept such dangerous secrets hidden away for so long. Each word she read brought her closer to understanding, but it also made the mystery deeper, darker. As she continued, she found another entry, one that made her pause. Her fingers shook slightly as she traced the ink on the page, her mind struggling to grasp what it meant. Charles, her aunt's late husband, had written about something he referred to as the deal. It was vague, cryptic, but the tone was unmistakable. He was involved in something far more sinister than Megan had ever imagined. The gold is secured. The artifacts will be sold, but only after the heat dies down. We must be careful, Clara. The people involved are not people we want to cross. If this gets out, we're done. Megan felt the air grow heavy as she reread the passage. The words echoed in her mind, growing louder with each repetition. The gold is secured. That was it. That was the treasure hidden in the basement. She stared at the page, her pulse quickening. What had her aunt's husband been involved in? What kind of people were they? The further she read, the more she realized that the wealth Clara had acquired wasn't built on hard work or good fortune. It had been acquired through deception and crime, a past her aunt had tried desperately to keep buried. As Megan turned the pages, her eyes landed on a letter tucked between two sheets of paper. It had been hidden at the back of the journal, as though Clara had placed it there on purpose to be found later, maybe by someone who was supposed to know the truth. Megan unfolded the letter with trembling hands, her breath catching, as she read the words that would change everything. The letter was dated several years before Clara had passed. It was from a lawyer, one Megan had never heard of, representing a group of individuals Megan could only assume were connected to Charles's illicit dealings. The letter confirmed that the gold and jewels Megan had uncovered were not inherited, not passed down through generations as she had thought. They were the result of illegal activities, treasure stolen from a private collection, money laundered through the very house Megan now called home. The letter also mentioned that the stolen treasures were to be kept hidden at all costs. Clara was instructed to protect them, to shield herself and anyone connected to her from the people who would stop at nothing to reclaim what they believed was theirs. It became clear now why her aunt had kept the treasures locked away, why she had hidden the truth so carefully. She wasn't just protecting herself from the law, she was hiding from those who would have killed to get their hands on the gold. Megan felt a chill crawl up her spine as she read the final lines of the letter. If anyone finds this, they must understand the danger. The treasure is not just wealth. It is a weapon. If the wrong person gets to it, everything we've worked for will be lost, and worse, they will come for anyone who knows. Her head spun as she processed the letter's contents. Clara had known the danger. She had kept the treasures hidden not out of greed or fear of losing them, but because she had known just how much harm they could cause. She had known that if anyone found the gold, if anyone uncovered what had been done to acquire it, they would be marked. And now Megan realized she was the one who had stumbled into it. She was the one who had opened the door to a dangerous, violent past. Megan's mind raced as the weight of the discovery hit her all at once. The treasures were more than just hidden wealth. They were a legacy of crime, a dark history that Clara had tried to shield her from. But by hiding the truth, Clara had left Megan standing in the middle of it all, exposed and vulnerable. As Megan sat there, the room around her feeling colder, The weight of the past pressing in from all sides, she understood something more clearly than ever. Her aunt's protective instinct, her silence, her secrecy, it had all been about survival. Clara had hidden the treasures not just to protect herself, but to protect Megan from the danger that came with knowing too much. But now it was too late. Megan had uncovered the truth, and she was now caught in the web of betrayal, deception, and crime that had built the very house she stood in. She didn't know what to do with this knowledge, or how to protect herself from the storm that was inevitably coming. The treasure was no longer just a gift. It was a curse, one that Megan had no idea how to break free from. Megan sat in the quiet of the hidden room, the treasures scattered before her, gleaming under the dim light of her flashlight. The gold coins, the glinting jewels, the delicate artifacts, each one seemed to pulse with a quiet power, a promise of something more than she had ever imagined. She could feel the weight of it all, not just in her hands, but deep in her chest. It was overwhelming. The discovery had felt like a miracle, a twist of fate that would finally lift her from the endless cycle of debt and stress she had been trapped in for years. It could solve everything, pay off the bills, fix the broken-down car, secure a future for Lena. The idea of what this gold could do, how it could change their lives, was intoxicating. But as her fingers brushed over the coins, a cold shiver ran through her. Her aunt's secrets had not come without a price. These treasures, this wealth, had not been earned through hard work or good fortune. They had been acquired through deception, betrayal, and suffering. They were stolen goods, blood money wrapped in gold, and Megan knew it. The letter, the journal, the cryptic entries they contained, it all pointed to the same dark truth. Clara had hidden this treasure to protect herself, to protect Megan, from a past too dangerous to face. Megan's stomach turned. She wasn't naive. She understood that life wasn't always about fair or just. It was about survival. And right now, survival meant paying bills, putting food on the table, and keeping Lena safe. But the cost of keeping these treasures, of taking something so marred by its origins, gnawed at her. Could she live with herself knowing that this wealth had been stolen from others, from people who would likely kill to get it back? The weight of the knowledge crushed her, and she found herself at a crossroads, torn between the promise of a better life and the haunting question of what kind of person she wanted to become. Her fingers trembled as she picked up a jeweled necklace, the diamond sparkling coldly in the light. It was beautiful, undeniably so, but it felt wrong in her hands, like a reminder of the dark history tied to it. Clara had hidden this away not out of greed, but out of fear. And now Megan, in her desperation, was faced with the same choice: use the treasure to secure a future, or walk away from it all and face the unknown. The idea of leaving it behind seemed impossible. The weight of the mounting bills, the constant worry about Lena's future, the life she had fought so hard to build, it all seemed so fragile. The treasure could fix it all. It could give them everything they had ever wanted: security, stability, a chance at happiness without the constant stress of just trying to make it through each day. But what about the people who had been hurt, the ones who had lost everything in the pursuit of wealth like this? What about the lives that had been torn apart so that Megan could live without consequence? Megan knew that keeping the treasure would mean living with that stain, with the knowledge that the gold beneath her fingertips wasn't just valuable, it was tainted. Megan stood up suddenly, the motion sharp, like she was trying to shake off the weight that was pressing down on her. She paced the small room, her thoughts a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. She wanted so badly to believe that she deserved this, that her struggle, her hardship, had earned her the right to take it. She had suffered long enough. But could she truly take something that wasn't hers? Could she take something that had been built on the suffering of others? Was that the kind of person she wanted to be? Her mind kept coming back to Lena. She was all that mattered, the only reason Megan had worked so hard, the reason she kept going even when everything seemed impossible. What would Lena think of this treasure, of its origins? when she was old enough to understand? Would Megan be able to explain to her daughter that this wealth had come at a cost, that the life they would live was bought with the suffering of others? Or would she, in her desperation, hide that truth away, as Clara had done, letting the weight of it all silently chip away at her own conscience? Megan stopped in front of the open chest, her eyes scanning the treasure one more time. She felt sick, the pressure of the decision threatening to crush her. No matter what she chose, it seemed like the wrong option. If she kept the treasure, it would change everything. But it would change her, too. It would make her someone she wasn't sure she could live with. But if she walked away from it, what kind of future would she be giving Lena? A future built on struggle and survival, never able to breathe free of the weight of their circumstances. The room seemed to close in on her, the silence amplifying the uncertainty in her chest. Megan felt like she was suffocating, trapped between two choices that both felt like the wrong one, and in that moment she understood something that terrified her. There was no easy answer. There was no path that would lead her to peace. There was only the weight of what she had found, and the choices she would have to make with it. The knock came late, a single deliberate tap that reverberated through the old house and sent a shiver down Megan's spine. The hour was far beyond reason for visitors, yet she felt in her bones that this was no ordinary call. Her hand hovered over the doorknob, her pulse quickening. Shadows stretched across the peeling walls, the dim light of her hallway flickering as if the house itself held its breath. She knew without needing to see that someone had come for more than conversation. When she opened the door, a man stepped into the threshold, his frame tall and imposing even in the darkness. His clothes were sharp, carefully chosen, the kind that didn't belong in a house like hers, in a neighborhood like this. His eyes, dark and calculating, scanned the room with an intensity that made her stomach tighten. She didn't recognize him immediately, but the aura he carried spoke of familiarity with secrets she had only begun to uncover. He smiled, but it was the kind of smile that promised nothing good. "Megan Hollis," he said, voice low, smooth, almost hypnotic. "I hope I'm not intruding, but we need to talk. About your aunt. About her collection." Her breath caught. Her hands instinctively clenched the edge of the doorframe. "Who are you?" she asked, though she already knew this wasn't someone she wanted to meet. He gave a small chuckle, stepping closer, the shadows wrapping around him. "An old friend of Charles. Your aunt's husband. You might say I know a thing or two about what he left behind." Megan felt the air tighten around her chest. She'd been expecting threats, calls from lawyers, the distant relatives trying to stake a claim, but nothing like this. This was different. This man didn't come with polite letters or legal posturing. He had come with the weight of the past, and with him it felt like the treasure had gained a pulse of its own. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice steadier than she felt. He tilted his head slightly, eyes glinting in the faint light. "I'll be direct. Your aunt's little stash, it's more valuable than you realize, but it's also dangerous. People will come for it. And I don't mean lawyers or distant relatives. I mean people who don't play by rules. Dangerous people. And you, dear Megan, are in the middle of it." She swallowed hard, her mind racing. She had wondered how long it would be before someone realized she had uncovered the treasures. She had feared attention, but the immediacy, the intensity of his presence made her stomach twist. "I'm listening," she said carefully. He smiled, leaning slightly closer, as though sharing a confidential secret. "I can make this easy for you. You hand it over to me, all of it. Gold, jewels, the works, and I'll guarantee you and your daughter's safety. No threats, no lawsuits, no one coming after you. You get to keep your life intact, a future without fear, without this burden hanging over your head. I can provide everything you need to live comfortably, safely, without ever worrying about what might come next." Megan's pulse raced as the weight of his words settled over her. The offer was tempting, seductive even. Safety, security. A life free of fear, free of the relentless anxiety that had plagued her since she had discovered the treasure. It was everything she had dreamed of, and yet Every instinct in her screamed that it was a trap. "And if I refuse?" she asked quietly, her gaze fixed on him, trying to gauge his intent. His smile hardened, just slightly, just enough to make her stomach clench. "Then we see how well you can hide from the people who will inevitably come for it. And you may not have the luxury of time to think things through. They don't negotiate." Megan stepped back, shaking her head. Her mind spun with the impossible options before her. She could hand over the treasure, secure their safety, and erase the burden that had been pressing down on her since she found the secret room. But in doing so, she would be surrendering everything she had fought to understand, everything she had uncovered about her family's past. The gold, the jewels, the secrets, they weren't just wealth. They were part of her aunt's legacy, dangerous though it might be. And if she refused, the threat hung over her like a guillotine, sharp and inevitable. Megan's chest tightened. She couldn't ignore the truth. This was no longer about inheritance or even money. It was about survival, and she had no idea if she was ready for the cost. The man took a measured step back, letting the silence stretch between them, letting the tension settle in the room. "I'll give you time to think," he said softly, but there was no kindness in his tone. "But remember, Megan, the world doesn't wait, and neither do the people chasing this. When you decide, I'll be ready." He turned, leaving as quietly as he had arrived, and Megan closed the door with trembling hands. The lock clicked shut, but the danger, the weight of the proposition stayed with her. She sank to the floor, her back against the door, staring at the shadows that seemed to grow longer with every heartbeat. The treasure was no longer just a promise of wealth. It was a storm, and she was standing right in the center of it, unsure which way to turn. Megan sat on the edge of the basement stairs, her hands trembling as she stared down at the treasures spread before her. The gold, the jewels, the velvet-covered chests, they glittered under the dim light, each piece a whisper of a past she didn't fully understand, each piece a promise of a future she could barely imagine. The weight of it all pressed against her chest, heavy with danger and possibility. And for the first time since discovering the hidden room, she felt cornered. The lawyer, the shadowy man, the distant relatives, they weren't going to stop. The threats were no longer hypothetical. They were real, looming, tangible. Her mind spun, the fear gnawing at her from all sides. If she handed over the treasure, she would be safe. The threats would vanish, the danger would recede, and she could return to her life, perhaps even pay off the debts that had shadowed her for years. But it wasn't hers to give up, not really. The gold, the jewels, the secrets, they were a part of her family now, no matter how dark their origins. Walking away felt like surrendering not just wealth, but identity, history, and the fragile sense of control she had struggled to hold on to in the chaos of her life. Megan rose to her feet, pacing the narrow confines of the basement. The walls seemed to close in on her, and the shadows of the treasures around her stretched, long and threatening, twisting into shapes of doubt and fear. Her chest tightened as she thought of Lena, her daughter, sleeping soundly upstairs, unaware of the storm closing in around them. Could she risk this? Could she stand firm and face the consequences of keeping the treasure? Or would that risk everything she had worked to protect? The decision clawed at her mind, insistent and unyielding. She drew a deep breath and forced herself to think clearly. The lawyer had been persistent, relentless, his veiled threats leaving her no room to breathe. The shadowy man had offered protection in exchange for compliance, a deal that sounded almost too good to refuse. But Megan knew better. She had learned over the years that anyone offering safety in a world like this wanted something in return. They wanted control, and she would not, could not, give that away, not to strangers, not to men who had skirted the edges of the law, not to anyone who saw her family as a prize to be claimed. Her eyes fell on the chest in the center of the room, its velvet lining gleaming faintly in the flickering light. She ran her fingers over the coins and jewels, the familiar weight grounding her. She could feel her aunt's presence in this space, the careful, deliberate way Clara had hidden these treasures, the years she had spent protecting them. And suddenly, Megan knew what she had to do. She could not hide. She could not surrender. She had to confront them, the lawyer, the shadowy figure, anyone who dared to threaten what was hers, what had been hidden for a reason. The plan was simple in theory, but terrifying in execution. Megan would demand that they leave her family alone. She would stand her ground, assert her control, and make it clear that she would not be intimidated. There was risk, yes, risk of violence, of legal battles, of exposure, but there was also dignity, a chance to reclaim her life and protect Lena without compromise. Megan could feel a fierce determination rising in her chest, replacing the fear with a strange, galvanizing strength. She had never been this resolute before, and yet it felt like the only choice left. She glanced around the room one last time, her gaze lingering on the treasures. The gold and jewels were more than wealth. They were history, memory, and the embodiment of her aunt's secret struggles. Megan understood now that standing her ground wasn't just about protecting herself. It was about honoring the legacy of the woman who had gone to great lengths to shield her family, about ensuring that the past didn't destroy the future she and Lena deserved. Megan exhaled slowly, letting the decision settle into her bones. She would face them. She would confront the lawyer and the shadowy figure, and she would demand that her family be left in peace. The choice was made, and for the first time in days, she felt the flicker of clarity that had been missing. She would risk everything, and she would do it on her terms. With her heart pounding, Megan straightened her shoulders and made her way toward the basement door, the treasures behind her shining faintly like silent witnesses. The house was no longer just a place of hidden wealth. It was a battleground, and Megan was ready to fight for what was hers. Megan's hands shook slightly as she adjusted the keys to the front door, the weight of what she was about to do pressing down on her chest like a physical force. She had spent hours preparing herself, pacing the rooms of the house, rehearsing the words she would say, the arguments she would make. Tonight would be different. Tonight, she wouldn't hide. She wouldn't bend. She wouldn't let fear dictate the terms. Tonight she would face them both, the lawyer and the shadowy man who had made the treasures a battleground, and demand the truth. The room where the meeting would take place was small, claustrophobic, but Megan had chosen it deliberately. The walls pressed in, the lighting harsh, unflattering, but it didn't matter. She didn't need comfort. She needed control. She arrived early, the envelope containing her notes, and the excerpts from her aunt's journal clutched tightly in her hand. Every piece of information she had gleaned, every entry that revealed the family's secrets, was now her armor. She sat at the edge of the worn wooden table, her back straight, her eyes steady as she heard the first knock at the door. The lawyer entered first, his polished shoes clicking against the hardwood floor. His expression was carefully neutral, but Megan could sense the calculation behind his eyes. He was the type who believed the law was a weapon, a blunt instrument to intimidate and manipulate. Behind him, the shadowy man followed, his presence far more immediate, more dangerous. He carried himself like a predator, his gaze sharp, flicking over every corner of the room, every surface, like he was evaluating the strength of the walls before he evaluated Megan. Megan didn't flinch. She took a deep breath, allowing the weight of the treasures, the journal, and the history she now carried to anchor her. "Thank you for coming," she said, her voice steady, even, disarming. "I believe it's time we put everything on the table. There are questions I need answers to, and I intend to get them tonight." The lawyer smirked slightly. "Ms. Hollis, surely you understand that this discussion could go easier if you—" "Easier?" Megan interrupted, her tone sharp. "You mean if I give in? If I hand over what's been hidden for decades without understanding the truth of it?" "Number. Tonight is about understanding, and I intend to understand everything before anyone claims anything." The shadowy man's eyes narrowed, the first crack in his mask of control. He leaned forward slightly, the shadows of the room making him look larger, more imposing. "Do you even know what you're dealing with?" he asked, voice low, measured, dangerous. "This isn't just gold. This isn't just jewels. This is power. And power belongs to those who know how to take it." Megan met his gaze evenly, refusing to let the threat seep into her bones. She placed the journal on the table and opened it to a page she had marked, the ink faded, but legible. "I know exactly what I'm dealing with," she said. "I know about your deals, about the secrets my aunt tried to protect me from. I know how this treasure was acquired, and I know what it means. You may think you hold the power, but you do not hold me." The lawyer's smirk faltered. He leaned back, trying to regain composure, but Megan's confidence was a physical force in the room. "Ms. Hollis," he began, but she cut him off. "Do not interrupt," she said firmly. Her hands shook slightly, but her voice carried every ounce of conviction she could muster. "I've read the journal. I've read the letters. I know about the schemes, the lies, the people who would kill for what my aunt kept hidden. And I also know that she did this to protect me, to protect my family. You think you can intimidate me into surrendering what she fought to keep safe? You are wrong." The room went silent for a heartbeat, the tension like a living thing pressing against the walls. Then the lawyer spoke again, his tone tighter now, less confident. "And what do you propose, Ms. Hollis? That you just keep it all? That you defy the law? Defy your family's rightful claim?" "I propose that you leave," Megan said, her voice like steel. "You leave my family alone. You leave this house alone. You take your threats, your intimidation, and you take them out of our lives. The treasure isn't just wealth. It's history. It's secrets. It's danger. And I will not let anyone use it to hurt me or my daughter." The shadowy man leaned back, eyes flicking to the journal on the table, then back to her face. Megan could feel him calculating, weighing the risks of pressing further. And then, slowly, deliberately, he nodded. The lawyer followed suit, the tension in the room beginning to ease just slightly. Megan exhaled, the first real breath she had taken in hours. She hadn't surrendered, hadn't given in, hadn't let fear dictate her actions. She had faced the storm head-on, armed with knowledge, courage, and the understanding that some things, family, integrity, survival, were worth more than gold. For the first time since discovering the hidden room, Megan felt a measure of control return. The treasure remained untouched, the threats held at bay, and she knew one undeniable truth. She had won tonight, not through fear, not through compromise, but through standing firm for what was right, no matter the cost. Megan closed the door behind her and leaned against the cold wood for a long moment, letting the echo of the confrontation settle into the quiet of the house. Her heart was still pounding, and her hands tingled from the adrenaline that had coursed through her veins. The lawyer and the shadowy man were gone, at least for now, and the treasures in the basement remained untouched, silent witnesses to the storm she had just weathered. She had kept the house. She had protected Lena. She had stood her ground and walked away with her dignity intact. And yet, the victory felt strangely hollow. Freedom, she realized, always came at a price. The basement stairs loomed before her like a threshold between the world she had just defended and the life she was about to resume. The gold and jewels glittered faintly in the dim light, but their brilliance was muted, dulled by the knowledge of what they represented. They were more than wealth. They were history, secrets, and consequences wrapped into one. Megan could feel the weight of it pressing on her chest as she walked away from the basement, up the stairs, and into the living room. The house felt different now, older, wiser, as though it had absorbed the tension, the danger, and now exhaled it slowly, leaving her to consider what she had gained and what she had lost. Her thoughts turned to Clara, her aunt, whose choices had shaped the path Megan now walked. She had kept the treasures hidden, not out of greed but out of foresight, out of a desire to protect her family from a past they were never meant to inherit. Megan understood that now. Clara's secrets had been a burden, yes, but also a shield. And in uncovering them, Megan had been forced to confront truths she hadn't known existed about her family, about the world, and about herself. Sitting at the edge of the worn sofa, Megan let her gaze drift to the window, where the first hints of dawn were brushing the sky with pale light. She realized that the confrontation had changed her in ways she hadn't anticipated. She would never see the world or her family the same way again. The treasures in the basement, the journal, the letters, even the threats, they had forced her to redefine her understanding of value, trust, and sacrifice. She had learned that wealth was not simply measured in gold or jewels, but in the choices one made, in the risks taken, and in the integrity one maintained under pressure. Megan's thoughts wandered to Lena, sleeping soundly in the next room, unaware of the danger that had stalked their home, unaware of the history that now lay buried beneath their feet. She thought of the life she had fought so hard to give her daughter, a life of stability and safety, a life where honesty and courage mattered more than ease or comfort. The confrontation had been exhausting, terrifying, and dangerous, but it had also been liberating. Megan had faced the shadows of her family's past, stared them in the face, and refused to bend. In doing so, she had secured not just her house, but a kind of freedom that came only with the understanding that some battles must be fought, and some burdens must be borne if one hopes to protect the people they love. She rose and walked slowly through the rooms, her fingers brushing over the worn banister, over the peeling wallpaper, over the small personal touches that Clara had left behind. The house was hers now, but it was not unmarked. It bore the history of those who had lived here, of those who had kept secrets, and of those who had suffered for wealth and legacy. Megan understood that freedom was never free. It demanded vigilance, courage, and sometimes sacrifice. She had paid that price tonight, and she would continue to pay it for as long as she called this place home. By the time Megan reached the front door, the sky had turned a clearer shade of morning blue, the sun casting soft, golden light across the yard. She opened the door and stepped outside, taking a deep breath of the cool air. The confrontation was over, the threats for now held at bay, and the treasure remained where it belonged, hidden, preserved, and untouched. But Megan knew that the world outside these walls was not so easily contained. There would be challenges, threats, and decisions to face in the days to come. She might have survived the storm, but she would never be the same. As she looked back at the house, the weight of what she had learned pressed on her heart. The treasure was buried, the secrets secured, and the dangers held at a distance. And yet Megan understood the truth she had always suspected, but never fully embraced. Freedom, even the kind she had claimed tonight, always came with a price. It demanded awareness, courage, and the willingness to carry the consequences of choices that few could comprehend. And for Megan, that price was worth paying. Megan stood in the center of the living room, surveying the space with a mixture of exhaustion and quiet determination. The house had always been a burden, a crumbling relic of her aunt's past, but now it was something more, a blank canvas. The walls, once peeling and dull, were slowly shedding their layers of neglect as she scrubbed, sanded, and repainted. Each stroke of the brush was deliberate, a small act of reclaiming the space, of taking ownership not just of the physical house, but of the life she wanted to build for herself and Lena. For the first time in months, Megan allowed herself to imagine a future unshackled by fear or debt. She paused near the window and watched sunlight spill across the floorboards, illuminating the dust motes that danced lazily in the warm light. The house was still far from finished, and yet the promise of it was palpable. She could already see the space in her mind's eye, a home filled with laughter, with warmth, with the everyday chaos that meant life was moving forward. It wasn't just about painting walls or repairing broken cabinets. It was about creating a sanctuary, a place where mistakes could be forgiven, where the past could be acknowledged but no longer dictate the present. Megan thought about everything she had endured, the discovery of the treasure, the confrontation with the lawyer and the shadowy figure, the revelations in the journal, the letters that revealed the darker side of her family's history. Each moment had been a test of her strength, and each had left an indelible mark on her heart. She had been forced to confront fear, greed, and the complicated morality of inherited wealth. And now, in the quiet of her home, she realized how much she had grown. The house was more than a building. It was a testament to her resilience, a symbol of the woman she had become. Her thoughts drifted to Lena, who was curled up on the couch with a blanket, sketching quietly in her notebook. The little girl's presence made the house feel alive, made the chores and repairs meaningful. Megan knelt beside her, brushing a stray lock of hair from Lena's face. "How's the drawing coming?" she asked softly. Lena looked up, eyes bright and focused. "Almost done," she said, a small smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. Megan smiled back, feeling a surge of warmth. Every decision she had made, every risk she had taken, had been for this: to give her daughter a place where she could feel safe, where she could grow without fear, where she could thrive. The days blurred together as Megan threw herself into the work of rebuilding. She cleaned, organized, repaired, and decorated. Each nail hammered, each shelf dusted, each coat of paint applied was a small step toward reclaiming a sense of normalcy. The house gradually began to feel less like a relic of her aunt's secrets and more like a home that reflected her own values: honesty, safety, and love. She even began to incorporate small touches that were uniquely hers: soft rugs for Lena's bare feet, a cozy reading nook, spaces where light and warmth could enter freely. Megan also found herself returning to the hidden room from time to time, not to touch the treasures or indulge in curiosity, but to remind herself of the lessons they carried. She understood now that life's value wasn't measured in gold or jewels, but in the choices one made in the face of adversity. Her aunt's secrets had been dangerous, but they had also taught her about responsibility, caution, and the importance of protecting those she loved. Megan had survived the storm, and in doing so, she had learned to navigate the world on her own terms. At night, when the house was quiet and the workday done, Megan would sit in the living room, Lena asleep in her bed, and take a deep breath. The air no longer felt heavy with fear or anticipation. She could hear the faint creak of the floorboards settling, the soft whisper of wind through the trees outside. And for the first time in a long time, she felt a sense of peace. The past, with all its dangers and secrets, was behind her. The treasure, while still hidden, no longer held power over her. What remained was her home, her daughter, and the life they were building together. Megan knew there would still be challenges, moments of doubt and difficulty, but she also knew she had the strength to face them. Each repaired wall, each cleared corner, each small act of care for the house and for Lena was a testament to her resilience. The house was becoming a home, not just a shelter, but a place filled with hope, safety, and the promise of new beginnings. Megan smiled softly, a quiet affirmation to herself and to the life she was choosing to live. She could breathe easy, finally, knowing she had survived the storm and that the future was hers to shape. Megan stepped back onto the front porch, her eyes taking in the sight of the house for the first time in months with a sense of quiet awe. The peeling paint was gone, replaced by a soft cream that caught the early morning light, making the house feel warm, alive, and welcoming. The shutters had been repaired, their navy blue finish gleaming against the smooth walls, and the yard, once a wild tangle of weeds and overgrowth, now bore freshly planted flowers and a small patch of grass where Lena could run and play without tripping over broken concrete. It was still her aunt's house, in essence, but it was hers now, transformed by her hands, her choices, and her determination to reclaim what had been lost. She bent down to adjust a small sign by the walkway, a handmade plaque Lena had painted declaring "Home" in crooked but loving letters. Her daughter's small fingers lingered on the edges, smudging the paint slightly, but Megan didn't mind. Every imperfection was part of their new beginning, part of the life they were creating together. Megan's heart swelled as she took Lena's hand in hers, feeling the warmth and certainty of that touch. For so long, they had navigated fear, uncertainty, and the shadow of secrets, and now, standing here together, there was clarity. The past had its scars, but it no longer dictated their path. Megan walked slowly down the steps, her eyes scanning every corner of the house she had renovated. The windows reflected the morning sun, each pane sparkling like a promise of possibilities. She could almost hear the echoes of the past, the whispered arguments, the hidden treasures, the confrontations that had tested her courage. But they no longer held her hostage. She had faced every challenge, every threat, and emerged on the other side, stronger, wiser, and more certain of what mattered. The treasures she had uncovered were still hidden, locked safely away, but their true value had shifted in her mind. It wasn't the gold or the jewels that mattered. It was the strength she had discovered in herself, the courage to confront danger, to protect her daughter, and to choose her own path. Lena tugged on her hand, breaking Megan's reverie. "Can we go inside, Mom?" "I want to show you something." Megan smiled, the tension in her shoulders easing for the first time in weeks. They stepped through the front door together, and Megan allowed herself to take in the interior. Each room was bathed in light, the walls freshly painted, the furniture arranged thoughtfully to create spaces for work, play, and rest. The kitchen smelled faintly of fresh paint and cleaning products, a reminder of the long hours Megan had spent scrubbing, organizing, and rebuilding. Every small detail, the rug under Lena's reading nook, the shelves lined with books and drawings, the curtains gently swaying in the morning breeze, was a testament to their hard work, their resilience, and their commitment to making this house a home. They moved toward the living room, where Lena had laid out a small corner with her art supplies, eager to add her own touches to the space. Megan knelt beside her, brushing a stray lock of hair from her daughter's face, and watched as Lena carefully added color to a drawing of their house, complete with flowers, a blue door, and a golden sun overhead. It struck Megan that this simple act, this moment of creation, was the truest expression of what they had gained. Not a treasure chest buried in a secret room, not the weight of gold or jewels, but the ability to start over, to shape their life together with intention and love. Megan felt a tear slip down her cheek as she wrapped her arm around Lena's shoulders. She had survived the storm, faced the threats, and reclaimed her life. The past no longer haunted her. It was a story she could acknowledge without fear, a history that had shaped her but did not define her. She had learned that the greatest treasure was not material, but the strength to move forward when everything seemed lost, the courage to confront danger, and the love that bound her to her daughter. As they stood together in the sunlit room, Megan felt a quiet certainty settle over her. Whatever challenges the future might hold, lawsuits, debts, or the lingering shadows of her aunt's secrets, she knew they would face them together. She had a home, a daughter, and a life rebuilt from the ashes of uncertainty. That was wealth beyond measure, a promise more enduring than gold. Megan squeezed Lena's hand gently, her heart full of hope, her mind at peace. They were ready. The future, finally, was theirs to shape. If Megan and Lena's journey inspired you, drop a comment below telling us where you're watching from, and don't forget to hit subscribe, because tomorrow we'll share another story that will tug at your heart and leave you breathless.